ज्ञानतिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जना शलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः। Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Uttapada Kamala Shri Guru Vaishnavamscha Shri Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanao Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karvavahai Tejasvi Navaditamastu Ma Vidvishovahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman, the reality, protect us. May Brahman sustain us. May Brahman illumine our thinking process. May we not find fault with each other, with the teachings, or with the world. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. And may peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om. We welcome you back to SRV Loka, the realm where we study the Dharma constantly, not just once a week as we meet here with you on Sundays, but as often as possible in our daily lives. Make these teachings live, as Vivekananda asked us to do. Not leave them in books and temples, but bring them right into our very lives. So a lot of what we've been talking about in the first half of this class and all of last Sunday in the first class on this subject of food, prana, and sadhana, sadhana being spiritual practice, is directed toward that ability to awaken the prana, connect it to the mind. Manaha prana sambandha. It's words like that exist in another language are so helpful to us when we don't have any in our own to explain things like that. I mean, can you imagine, without knowing Sanskrit or having any idea of the spiritual life of yoga and Buddhism and Tantra and Vedanta and Samkhya and these other great systems in India that have been there since time out of mind, walking up to someone and talking to them about connecting their body to their prana and their prana to their mind and their mind to their intellect. They would, if you didn't have a word for it or some sort of ideology around it, they would probably turn away and not listen to you or think you were crazy. So this is one very important connection to make, is to the Devabhashya, that is the language of the gods, the language that India used to explain these very things that they noticed over time had a tendency to fall out in human consciousness, disappear. In fact, we were talking just at the break about the Ramayana and Adhyatma Ramayana and Sita and Rama and Hanuman and Lakshman and so forth, how they're going through this big turmoil of trying to get Sita back, and how Ravana stole Sita away and Ram has to go looking for her and Hanuman helps him, and so they're going on this whole big play of life, you see, with all its pathos and its problems and its difficulties, and then all of a sudden they just stop and start talking about God. Then the discourse is over, they're back trying to find Sita again. Then next day, in the middle of the forest, on their way there, they start talking about God. It's very beautiful It just doesn't happen in other stories you're reading. People don't just stop the process. They worry continually about, they're in the forest, the Indians are coming, you see, they're going to get burned at the stake, and there's no stopping and talking about God. But you need an enlightened soul with you like Ram or Sita or some of those people to start giving a little talk about what you just experienced, see. And in order for that to make sense, you have to stop the flow. So this ability to stop is going to be based upon your control of the prana. Purify, control, and raise it. When you control it, then you can stop the process from happening. Usually we look at that in spiritual life as meditation, dhyan yoga, or Raja yoga. And it's why I put this chart up. I just want to flash it at everyone because it's so well known. However, there might be some souls watching now or in the future, as these films are set up to do, when people really get interested in the West, more about the Vedanta and some of these great precepts and axioms that are so present there, then they might want to know about what we've just been talking about in terms of connecting the prana to the mind and how to affect that process. And they might want to think it sounds kind of a lot like yoga. Only probably what's there here that isn't there is food, the import of food. But basically you can see that you start with these 5 yamas and niyamas. Basically you want to have nonviolent a vow of nonviolence, to not hurt or harm in thought, word, and deed would be nice. And you want to have truthfulness, and you don't want to covet the possessions and wealth of other beings, other nations. You want to be moderate in your sexual appetites and your sensual appetites, and control that prana inward, draw it inwards, and put it on important things so you can be at peace. And you want to stay away from too much commerce, gift giving, gift receiving, aparigraha it's called. Those are the basic 5 yamas of yoga. And then the niyamas are do some austerity, memorize and study some scripture, worship the Lord, and then be content and try and purify. All of those are mentioned here in this chart. So you can see how it's the early part of this chart, how to connect the prana to the mind. Manaha prana sambandha is again the word, is there in the practicable yoga. See, yoga is not so non-dual as Advaita Vedanta. In Advaita Vedanta there is no practice, you are that. And that's very good for a very high elevation of soul and mind, very, very a person with very high quality consciousness who comes into the body already perfect, say, like a Nityasiddha or a great rishi or a great yogi. But for others, then it may be a far cry still, and something they're working towards at best. But so then there's this concession, as you might say, of the 8-limbed yoga. So Patanjali outlined it very nicely. 5 yamas, 5 niyamas. Then finally he says, when you have these 10 in hand, then start the Sadanga yoga, 6-limbed. He calls Sadanga yoga in the Ashtavakra Samhita. Somebody just showed me a copy of that at the break, some portion of it, Ashtavakra Samhita. And it's called 6-limbed instead of 8-limbed because they figure you probably already have this under wraps. And if you came in with all of these, it would be sort of in Christendom coming in with all the 10 commandments perfectly in order. See? In India and in yoga, if you came with all of these, then you'd already have the fundamentals of yoga already under your control, in your possession. I mean, but that's quite a lot if you study the scriptures. That itself is a lot to do. As you know, so you've come in with quite a lot if you have these 2 limbs mastered. What to speak of then, once you have them mastered, going on and doing some breathing exercise. First some asana and then some breathing, which is here. We kind of gave out that cautionary teaching that you don't want to sit like this and breathe without mastering something like that, or at least having a good idea of it. Because why? Because when you sit like this, you spread the spine and back. And that's already beginning to awaken the psychic prana. Penultimate to Shakti is already starting to come up the spine before you're ready for it to. And so there are people who have problems jumping stages like that. Oh, I think I can just sit and do this practice and meditate. Others who've mastered it previously, they don't have that problem. It comes naturally to them, but there are problems along the path, and there are impurities that are coming up in the process, and they come back down and they cause havoc later on, like problems of indeterminacy and giving up and doubt and all the problems that we're aware of people falling off the path of yoga. So both that posture and then the breathing, is so much akin to getting a hold of this udana, this certain prana that's upward going, and then mastering the downward prana with it, the apana, and then mastering the kumbhaka state in between, which is breathless state. Sometimes there's even a samadhi called kumbhaka where you're just thrown into a breathless state for a long period of time. You don't breathe. And then all of a sudden, sort of like deep sleep, you come out of it, you see. In deep sleep, people don't breathe for 5-10 minutes at a time sometimes. They're just so concentrated, and all of a sudden, it's just like coming up for a breath with an aqua lung, you see, out of the water, or with a snorkel. So there's these, when you master these turns of breathing process, pranayama, with full consciousness after having done a practice, then it releases a great power and you're ready for it. Otherwise, this is why a lot of these people are having problems. Even pain in the body and calling up all sorts of negative experiences from their past lifetimes. There are things about the psychic prana that can go awry on you. It's nothing to be meddled with, you see, without being prepared. They say, for instance, like this chakra here, this Agya chakra, which is third eye, they call it, or if thine eye be single, the Jnana Chakshu, Krishna and Christ talked about it too, is that there's a nectar there which is one-pointed insight, but there's also a poison there called disorientation. The soul, if it arises there before it's ready, it gets disoriented. It's not comfortable with formlessness, and that can cause a lot of problem. For instance, coming back from that experience, you say, I never want to go there again. But you didn't realize that you weren't balanced when you went there. It happened sort of against your will, or before you were prepared and ready for it. So that's why the whole yogic system and other systems like that are based upon this kind of step-by-step, stage-by-stage purification leading to awakening. And it's idyllic to think that that will be always the case, but it is the ideal to work for. In the meantime, even being aware of these problems will help you deal with them later by going back, as I was saying, and filling in these gaps. Because everything doesn't happen in a perfect linear order all the time, especially in spiritual life. We know it doesn't happen that way even in worldly life or earthly life, but in spiritual life too, it can be throw you a lot of curves. So these two limbs then, posture and breathing, are important, I'd say, for those reasons, not for the reason of because I like to shift my body a lot, because I can even make a habit of that. And I can't sit still anymore because I want to shift to another position. Asana vasana samskara, they call it. I have a vasana, desire, around doing asanas, and that's made a samskara, impression in my mind. For lifetimes, maybe. Maybe I'll just be born as a hatha yoga teacher, and that's all I'll do in yoga, because I have an asana vasana samskara in me. See? But the ekasana I never mastered. Buddha had to master that. because he sat for 49 days in it, see? Most of the time. Christ was that way in the wilderness. So you have this strong foundation you built, and it can't have any imperfections or impurities in it. Probably my favorite story about it was Sri Ramakrishna's story about the master potter who formed a pot out of some new clay he got, fired it in the kiln, and when he opened it up, it was cracked all over. He went back to his original clay and found out that it had come to him with little grains of sand and bits of impurities, tiny bits of glass, things in it, you see. Foreign objects, too tiny to see sometimes. So he spent days taking all those out of his next lump of clay. Then he made the pot perfect, as he does as a master potter, fired it in the kiln, and it was strong and lasted for years. And it was a perfect creation, you see. So those little imperfections are what really make the difference in success in spiritual life or not. Actually, a few months ago we had a series of classes called that, success and failure in spiritual life. We give retreats on topics like that. So these are things to bring out metaphorically and by way of analogy that will allow us to inspect ourselves closely before we move along too swiftly, take on too much before we're ready and have to then backtrack. You see, filling in gaps, that's okay. Backtracking's not so okay. There's a difference. So, breathing posture, then you remember pratyahara, or self, I put them all in English here so it's easier for people, but pratyahara means sense control. Basically, you take the senses away from the objects. That here, you see, is over here too in terms of purifying the senses. You'll be able to, at will, take the senses away from objects. Do you want this delicious cup of cappuccino? No. See, that's willpower. That's pratyahara in action, you see, at the level of food. And then you'll have to use that same willpower at other levels too. See, do you want this occult power? See, do you want to be able to levitate and walk on water? No. Because Krishna and Ramakrishna, the two bookends of India, have told me that the occult powers will ruin my spiritual life. If I have even one of them, I will not be able to succeed spiritually, Krishna told Arjuna. So no, I don't want those. That's pratyahara at the level of psychic prana. And then there's a pratyahara that's going to have to be placed into effect at the next level of your shift of consciousness to a deeper and more subtle realm. See? Deeper and more subtle realm. See? It comes out of the body by an act, comes out into the body by an act of mind, and then with the Atman it flows to any desired realm you want it to flow to. So that's mastery of that process. So he's getting towards that when he says if you can master the senses, that would be the fifth yoga. 6, 7, 8, they're called samyama. Put together, they're basically concentration, meditation, and samadhi. So that's the 8 limb of yoga, and we give, of course, retreats on that. We practice it, all limbs, all the time, and we share it with others who are interested. I just wanted to bring it up in conjunction with this original chart we're doing, just so you can see how similar it is in its flow. With these 4 pillars, you might say, not that Patanjali didn't start out with food, because there are some teachings on that in yoga, but this takes into account, starts with food, goes to prana, goes to psychic prana. Psychic prana here would be more in the level of this upper 4 limbs. You're beginning to exercise the psychic prana to control your mind, to sharpen your intellect, and to help your thoughts flow toward any given desired level of consciousness you want to attain. And bring yourself to that level with the least amount of problem or impediment. So that's to be shown in the middle. Now let's go in the interim, let's go back and look at the rest of this chart, because we want to finish this today. We'll be referring to this over the next 3 weeks, but we'll be referring to it in terms of taking other teachings that go with these attributes of this particular path. Now we arrived here at Shakti power before the break, and that's going to be a subtler energy than prana. Prana is not sentient. Shakti power is showing huge signs of sentiency. It's self-aware, and of course has at its foundation the Mahashakti herself. She's one of her beautiful names. We can sing many names to her, for instance, like Bhagavati Devi Paramari Shakti Mahamai Sanatani Devi Yoganidra Devi Parashakti Devi Nirguna Maheshwari Devi Devi Brahmamai Leelamai Shakti Sarva Chaitanya Rupa Mahakali Devi Mahalakshmi Triloka Shivani Devi Mahavidya Mahamahi Shri Devi Padam Shri Devi Padam Basically, O God is Mother, preeminent in primordial spiritual energy, Shakti, the eternal source of the twin forces of projection and withdrawal. You place beings into sleep and into meditation and carry them beyond the entanglements of nature. Your supreme powers, both subtle and evident, mark you as the ultimate reality. So she's the progenitress, is the overseer of all these energies, gross and subtle and causal. And as you work your way internally to her, whether you take her as an ideal or come upon her, as it were, by accident, as you uncover these deeper levels of her own awareness, then you will come upon this Shakti power, see, that's coursing. And it's intelligent. It's the difference between it and psychic prana and prana is that it tends to transcend mere thinking. And the intellectual sheath itself, it starts to take on a shining light of its own called intelligence. Not intellect, but intelligence. Intellect's the container, intelligence is the infiller, you see. So in that way, we could say all of us are the sheath, and she's the infiller. Shakti is in each and all of us. But hard to say that without, and really understand it without first accounting for food and prana and psychic prana, which are steps in which we can meet her, see, within us. Otherwise, we just sort of jump to her. Oh, Mother's everything. Sort of like saying, God is everything. But it's very risky to say something like that, because God is not a thing. You could say God is in everything, but then you'd have to define that. You see, is it in us as blood, or is it in our mind as thought? None of those things are mentioned by the seers as being God. Only God is God. Brahman is Brahman. Consciousness is Brahman alone, and nothing else is Brahman. So you can make these grand statements and be very well intentioned about it, and you can correct them later as you find out higher and higher wisdom. But it'd be better to take it step by step and know that yes, you're seeing Mother Energy when you see food, but if you're not acknowledging it's that, then when you eat it, she remains unseen by you, unknown. The very energy by which you're conducting yourself is either her or not here, or not her, depending on your consciousness, the presence of your awareness. Somebody was saying when you're not yourself, it's like, you're not behind your own eyes. Like yourself is somewhere else, you see, and you don't feel yourself. So it's like a movie out of focus. So when you put together these connections, manaha, prana, sambandha, then you begin to feel very, very much like yourself all the time. And you don't see why it should be any other way. And you're not going to accept any other imitations, masquerades. You want the Shakti power in you all the time. And prana and psychic prana will follow her bidding, you see. This is Shakole Tomari Icha. It's a beautiful song in India. Oh Mother, all happens by thy own supreme will. So all of that follows, see, from knowing her. If we move on with that, and just to complete this chart, the introduction to this chart, the roadmap, as it were, then we see that these four yogas, these kinds of sadhana that you're beginning to take on, reach a sort of apex, don't they? Because basically, there's probably, of all the four yogas, they all have their key parts, but they often say the seer's meditation is the final one to really mature. To be able to actually meditate on Brahman, particularly. Usually in the interim you're meditating upon the Ishtam, right? The Guru and the mantra suggested to you an ideal. Shiva, Krishna, Buddha, Jesus, so forth. So you have an ideal that's part of that mantra, and so you're longing and striving for a vision of God with form. And you may have that in your deepest contemplations, or even in dream, swapna siddha. You may have that kind of vision in a dream even, if you're particularly connected that night. Otherwise, dreams can be the 1,000 imbecilities of the mind. See? People complain about that. Oh, I had a very powerful dream, but then for days afterwards it was just silly dreams. So the mind is going back and forth through these gunic cycles, you see, but every once in a while it'll become really balanced, and it'll have that powerful look through Maya. Sri Ramakrishna said in Calcutta once there was this big clock they put together with hundreds and thousands of gears, evidently. And it was encased in glass, so you could see all the gears working. But if you knew that for 1 hour out of every year, the gears came together in such a way that you could see through the clock. You see, so when they saw him that, it was much more than a sort of nice bit of worldly knowledge or some science experiment or something. That's just like the mind being perfectly balanced in a certain meditation, and you see Brahman. You see through Maya, just like that. You see. A very beautiful story analogy he used about that, which is why Holy Mother later was to teach, you must meditate 365 times a year. See. If you give up a few of those, that might be the time that you miss seeing through that clock of Maya. See. She was really into perseverance. So whether you had a bad meditation, a good meditation, a mixed meditation, or whatever, you had to sit and meditate every time so that you would not miss those few meditations that were particularly significant. And you know how Maya works. If you've been living long enough, you know that the worst thing will happen at the worst possible time. You see, like Rabindranath Tagore had a song once where he said, "Oh, I waited for God all night. I sat up, waiting. He was going to knock at my door." See? And so I sat up all night waiting for that knock. I knew he was coming. And then I fell asleep for about 10 minutes. That's when he knocked. See? And I was not there to receive him. Worse than that, I woke up and I was thinking, oh, did he knock during that time? So then there's doubt that follows, you see. Tortures you more than just the fact. See? Indecision, you don't know, you see. Unknowingness. So with that being the case, then you have to always be on vigil, as Swami Paramananda used to say, one of the great Ramakrishna Swamis on the west coast there in California for a while. He wrote a book called Vigil. So you have to be on vigil all the time, you see. And you're going to need to be ever awake for that, aren't you? You're going to have this prana at your beck and call. And eventually, hopefully, the Shakti power flowing through you, unimpeded and uninterrupted. So that you can have an unimpeded, uninterrupted meditation on Brahman when the time comes. So we're getting to that. So meditate first on Ishvara, God with form. That becomes possible for you. I know some of my Hindu students, younger people, and say, well, my father was instructed by one of the former Ramakrishna order presidents to build the ishtam from the feet up. So there's actually a method in India where you sit and you have, say your ishtam is like Krishna, say is a pretty popular ishtam in India. So you start with Krishna's feet and you envision that in your mind. And you actually build it as you're building it out of some material. See, this is going to be consciousness. It's going to be thought first, but it's going to end up as consciousness. So if you can practice maybe, days, weeks, months, finally I see the feet clearly every day. Then you add the shins, the knees, thighs, waist, and so forth. Till finally I can see the head and the eyes. You see, now I can see the eyes. So this is how they build the ishtam when they meditate on Ishvara. And quite often people in the West, will just say, I think I'll just try and vision the whole thing at once. Well, good luck with that, as they say, but it's possible. And there's not a lot of time in the Westerners' daily life, probably in anyone's daily life nowadays, the way the world is, to spend a lot of time building something that precious. You need time to do that. You need some retreat, or some, like we were just saying, you just stop in the middle of your forest with Ram and have him talk to you for an hour before you start back into life again, which is kind of what we're doing here, isn't it? Not easy to stop the flow of prana and erratic prana. Quite often people are just living with impure prana, aren't they? Just craziness. And they get ill health, and they don't breathe right, and so forth. They have doubts and fears. So that becomes habitual, you see. So to stop that's going to be twice as hard, maybe more so, than stopping regular prana. I mean, if you're living a healthy life and your prana is pretty much refined, then you probably can't think all of a sudden, I think I'll go meditate. I'll go read that scripture now. I feel good. No reason why I shouldn't do that. But if the erratic prana, you're not thinking those thoughts. You're rushing restlessly to the next thing as if that's going to fulfill you. You're trying to get out of this feeling of not being behind your own eyes, see? And it's not working very well. Maybe in running hot, running cold, stops and starts, as they say. Sometimes you can affect it. But you want this uninterrupted and unimpeded. So this is one of the beauties about meditating on Ishvara daily for an hour with the mantra. See, it's the key practice of practices. There's no better practice for this day and age than mantra coupled with Ishvara. If you're not given to that temperamentally, then you go to Zen or Advaita or something and you start trying to meditate on the formless light. And good luck with that. Again, as they say, you get to the Father through the Son is one of the famous sayings about that. Probably should put something in place before you try and reach the heights like that. You're going to get through the form to formlessness. And that's the high form you're talking about there. Or, as I've often said, you need friends in high places. Not just true in the business world, it's also true in spiritual life. Whereas that seer or that avatar or that great soul, my guru even, who's left the body, comes along and helps you at a certain point. See, even your ancestors have been known to do that, and celestials, angels, and so forth, come along and help you at a certain point. So, but it's going to be much more efficacious for you in your bid for enlightenment, for self-realization, if you have a friend in high places. If you have somebody who is always thinking of you, always thinking of your highest good, and is going to be constant in that. They've learned to be constant in that through this kind of process. Masters of life and remover of the misery of the devotees. As we say about Sri Ramakrishna, Sri Sharda Devi, and Swami Vivekananda. And we always sing about them in that way, right? Yogananda Premananda Daschanye Vaicha Parshada Ramakrishna Gatta Prana Sarvantam Pranamamyaham. One of the mantras we use in puja. Yogananda Premananda Daschanye, that is, all those great 16 disciples of Ramakrishna, we pay our salutations to them. They got the prana, who had their life forces merged in him. He was their ideal. He lived amongst them. They dedicated themselves 100% to him. They realized he loved them far more than their parents ever did, and that he was the avatar of the age. See, that's why Swami Shardananda, one of the direct disciples, wrote this hymn. That's one of the 5 verses. Because he realized all those beings are going to have their life forces merged in Ramakrishna. What is life force? Prana. They have their very energy merged in him. See? Their thoughts are prana, their food is prana, their psychic prana is prana. The very Shakti power that he worshipped in Kali is there in Ramakrishna. They're merging in that, you see, with all intensity. That's called an Ishtam, Ishvara. See, I have taken an Ishtam, I've taken a guide, I've taken a savior, I've taken, probably better than savior, an exemplar for the spiritual path. Because the problem with the savior sometimes, you don't go on to the Almighty Father. You don't go from the Son to the Father. See? So you need to make that full 100% surge of energy. Prana, psychic prana, and Shakti. Put them together and make that connection to the highest illumined mind. See? The illumined mind with this active and vibrant prana. So, after that, you would attain samadhis. Notice how I put an S at the end of that, because in yoga here, as you see this chart, maybe, I don't know if you want to look back on it for the live streaming audience, but there are 4 types of lower samadhis called sampragyata. And then you get to the higher samadhi, asampragyata. What do those words mean? Sampragyata means seated. Seated with form, and with I-ness, and with lower bliss. That's why they're called sasmita. That's, asmita is I, right? It's the problem of I-ness, so it's with I. Sananda means with bliss, savichara with form, savitarka with gross form. So basically you're having samadhis in the realm of gross form. That is, objects begin to look like God to you. Then you're having samadhi in your mind about forms, you see. And that's an interior samadhi, savichara. Then you're having a samadhi of bliss, like I said, a limited bliss that maybe might keep you from moving deeper toward a seedless state. And then you're having a samadhi with I, a refined I. I practice self-surrender, right? And I got rid of my gross I. Now I have a refined I. I'm not talking about this eye, I'm talking about the ego eye, sasmita. Asmita is one of the great barriers, kleshas to yoga. But now I'm having a samadhi with a refined eye. You see, I've offered myself to my ideal. Ramakrishna got the prana, right? I have merged myself with my ideal. And now I have the very definite possibility that I can pass through the eye of a needle. A camel can pass through the eye of a needle. See, it has become a refined camel. See, now I can get to the Father through the Son. So this eye has become so ripe and so mature that it can actually easily give itself up into Brahman, like a hailstone falling into an ocean, Shankara said. So that's getting very subtle, and it's under the auspice of Shakti that you're doing this. Shakti wouldn't have been attainable to you, most likely, unless you were a past master, unless you had connected it up to these levels. You had connected prana to the mind. The mind otherwise would just remain a brain, and that's all you'd think about. It's a noodle that decays at the end of 80 or 100 years, you see. But the mind is a kingdom of heaven within me. The mind has everything in it that's eternal, and that goes on forever and ever. See, it's a whole landscape inside of me that I see in my dreams, but I don't recognize as consciousness because I haven't made these connections yet. As soon as I make these connections, my dreams become radiant meditations. And line of that song. A man has come to me from a land that never sleeps. Now my dreams have become radiant meditations. So this is an actuality. One experiences this in dream and in meditation. And yes, I have. So one becomes very sure of it, and those experiences are, of course, rare but very powerful, and make a huge impression on you called a samskara. Now, samskaras were those things that were mental impressions that kept you from growing before. Now those have been undone, and you have these new samskaras of sasmita samadhi forming in you. Oh, now I remember having aina samadhi. I remember having bliss samadhi. I remember having object and subjective samadhis. In fact, I'm probably having those all the time. When I first picked up the scriptures and read them, I was just having good intellectual feed, you see, food, right? It was food for my mind. But when I digested them and then picked up the scriptures, now I'm having wisdom samadhi, see. In fact, I can take the book away, see, and just start thinking, because I did all my memorization, so I can just start thinking, see, about all the beautiful slokas that the seers have spoken from time out of mind. They're readily available to me. That's a wisdom samadhi you're talking about there now. And you can go there anytime you want because you mastered prana. You know, people try and memorize things, but then they don't stick in the mind, right? It's because the prana it hasn't been purified yet. It's erratic still. So they say, oh, I forgot that, you see. But when the prana becomes pure and flows, it carries those memories with it all the time, you see. It's the cause of memory. There are words for this in Sanskrit that aren't there in English and other languages, but the very cause of memory is there, and you can uncover it. Just like doing that, you can uncover memory of your past lifetimes. Krishna says that to Arjuna in the Gita. You haven't awakened that yet, that ability yet, Arjuna, so you don't know your past lifetimes, but I know all of mine and where they stretch back. I got this great wisdom from an early seer. So those kinds of abilities are spiritual abilities, purely spiritual abilities, and they belong to the realm of spirituality, and they're not found anywhere else. This is what we're talking about when we talk about Shakti, on in. See, I was going to say on up, but what's up there but 3 elements? The other 2 are probably not even up there. See? Only here we're getting all 5. but on inward means to the Divine Mother herself. And so that's where you would attain these seated samadhis, and finally you would get the asampragata. It means no seeds left anymore, no seeds of ego, no seeds of bliss, no seeds of subjective or objective samadhis. You're getting a seedless state. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, strew paddy, you know what paddy is, right? All over the ground before the rainy season. So you can come back, it's a riot of growth, right? Take that same paddy and warm it over the fire for a few seconds on a frying pan, then strew it. Come back after the rainy season. Nothing. See? So he's talking about burning the seeds of your karmas for rebirth in the fire of knowledge, in the frying pan of this mind. You can strew them anywhere. They're not going to produce bodies anymore. You're free from bodies, which is, by the way, in case we haven't realized it yet about Buddhism, Vedanta, yoga, and other Indian darshanas, the purpose of life is to get beyond attachment to the body. It's to get into your true self, which is formless. That's where you have arrived at Shakti power, or Mahashakti herself. You're able to meditate on Brahman, the formless reality, which is your formless nature. Sampragyata Samadhi here, Nirvikalpa Samadhi here, same thing. Satorian Zen and Nirvana in Buddhism, borrow words from other religious traditions. They're talking about this same seedless, formless Samadhi, where the hailstone gave up its final vestige into the ocean of consciousness, where the salt doll walked into the ocean and never came out again, dissolved in its own essence. Even when it was in the form, it was that essence, but it didn't know it, see. So then it walked into the ocean and proved itself once and for all. I am that. That thou art. Tat Tvamasi. And all those beautiful sayings that come with it. Now there you see Nirvikalpa Samadhi and Lord Shiva in the middle. He's a good representative of the illumined mind, or the luminous mind. Pipalada says there, a great rishi in the Prajna Upanishad says, "My young friend, the one who knows that imperishable one, in which rest the mind, the prana, and the senses, verily becomes omniscient and enters into everything." So as best as the English language can say, this luminous mind, or Chit Jyoti, you want to call it, or Chit Shakti, sometimes Patanjali used for this luminous mind. Jyoti means the light of consciousness. It's not just the light of a sun or light of a candle or any other kind of light. It's the light of consciousness itself. It's the very inherent nature of consciousness. It's this light of intelligence. So there you'll find that shining off of Brahman, off of the Word. I say Brahman, the Word of God. And it shines off as pure intelligence, and that intelligence eventually turns into objects much later in the game. But we know 24 cosmic principles later, and everything is, then water is shining under the sun. So we know that very light of consciousness has taken the form of water and sunlight. It's in a very limited state. It's not in its sentient state anymore. It's in its insentient state, sleeping. My teacher used to say that. In plants and insects, consciousness is dreaming. In animals, consciousness is half awake. In mankind, consciousness is awake. But in the seers and rishis, it's fully awakened. Buddha was the fully awakened one. That's what he said, his last words. You should know that I am awakened intelligence. Bodhi, Buddha nature. He had words for that back then too, like pragyaparam, supreme intelligence, was one of the words he used. They say, oh, he didn't believe in God? What's God, you see? He called it supreme intelligence, supreme consciousness, pragyaparam. or Tathagata, a mass of awareness, a mass of undifferentiated, boundaryless awareness, infinite. So this is Brahman, this is God, this is the Almighty, this is formless, this is spirit, this is Buddha nature. So having seen that, then man has seen all it needs to see. I and my Father are one is the only conclusion that can come out of that perception, that highest perception. So we have arrived there, and Lord Shiva, also Lord Brahma and Lord Vishnu, whatever the case, there to guide you into this, with this luminous mind, into the non-dual Brahman. So all tracing it back to food, like Holy Mother's statement here, from pure food one gets pure blood. From pure blood, pure energy. From pure energy comes pure thoughts, and from pure thoughts one gets pure mind. And pure mind is God, Sri Ramakrishna used to say. Buddha mind, Buddha nature is Buddha mind, is Buddha nature. So this is a very truncated way, very condensed way, right, in which she put this whole thing. See, if you just take that one paragraph, memorize that, and follow it with these practices prescribed by the scriptures and the seers, then you'll reach the goal of human existence. Now, that segues us back to food. It's going back, as it were, evolution, involution. So now we're going back to food to use our remaining time to look at this, because we looked at it once last week, but we didn't take it up. So now let's return in the next 3 classes, plus the remainder of this second class, to look at a few more points about food before we get into the specific teachings on prana. These will fill in those gaps that we need to think about. Here, you see, it's put in terms of the 4 prasadas. Now, we just sang a song at the first half by Ram Prasad. So he's the very prasad of Rama. He loves Rama, you see, so his parents named him Ram Prasad, so he's the food of Ram. He's the very prana of Ram. He's the offering to Ram. Because, of course, prasad is offered food, sanctified food. That's what most people think of the definition of food. So there you see that first kind of teaching, anaprasada, clarity of food. You need that. And then you need chitta prasada, clarity of mind. The third prasada is samprasada, clarity of mood. And fourth is adhyatma prasad, clarity of spirit. So these are the 4 prasads as given in this teaching, coming from great scriptures like the Bhagavad Gita. Now, under anaprasad, you see there the 3 qualities of food: tamasic, rajasic, and sattvic. The gunas follow everything. So here in food, we have the 3 gunas in food. Tamasic food is stale, tasteless, overcooked, impure. Really, it's refuse. It's not to be taken. And it will not give you that pure blood that you're looking for. Therefore, it will not give you that pure energy. Remember what we were just saying? A prana is frayed, it's erratic. If you look at an electronic wave, you see how the edges on it, you see, and then it can be smoothed out like a laser, just made perfectly pure, you see, and flowing in one direction without any overlaps. So the prana is rough-edged like that. It makes you nervous, and you can't make any progress, you see. You fail at action, or you do it in a shodden fashion, you see, and you also can't meditate. You can't be at peace with that kind of erratic energy. So the food is contributing greatly to that. Now, if you took rajasic food, it's bitter, sour, saline, hot, pungent, and dry, Krishna says in the Gita. Sattvic food is that food which gives vitality, energy, vigor, health, and joy. really, in the Gita, there's no mention about being a vegetarian by Sri Krishna. Sometimes they make a big deal about having to be vegetarian. Really, the teaching goes that it's best to be vegetarian as you begin your spiritual practice. Avoid certain kinds of foods that are contributing to rajasic and tamasic moods. See, because mood comes soon here. So if you're taking foods that are contributing to tamasic and rajic states, like heavy foods, so you feel weighty, then your mind is also going to feel weighty, your mood's going to be weighty, and you're not going to see that shining spirit inside of you through all this. You can't see the forest through the trees kind of idea. See? So sattvic food is going to be that food which is, by definition, that gives you lightness and vitality and vigor. Now, there are 5 defects in food as a teaching there under the anaprasadic category. It might be interesting for many of us to either revisit that or see it for the first time. It doesn't have a lot to do, again, with meat or vegetarianism. It doesn't have a lot to do with organic or non-organic. In those days, they probably didn't have pesticides in the first place, of the kind that we're used to nowadays, to trying to avoid. But to them, they were looking more into the nature of food and why it had these defects in it. First was poor soil, lack of nutrients, like maybe not enough water, not enough sun, and so forth. That's a physical defect in food. Second was selfish purpose while harvesting. So people were growing it for money, harvesting it with the idea of gain and wealth, and instead of altruistically or with the idea of trying to feed people, to do away with their hunger, to satisfy them, and to give them pure food so they could have pure energy and they could realize God. I mean, this would be how your spiritual farmer would raise food. See, he would be thinking of you, wouldn't just be thinking of money or commerce. We already had the problem of commerce, was back here at the parigraha, right? You spend so much time giving and receiving of materials that you forget about your past lifetimes. That's the parigraha's main teaching. So you don't remember your past lifetimes because you're too much engaged in commerce, in gift giving and gift receiving. So that's how Vedavyas would comment on Patanjali's yama there of a parigraha. So selfish purpose while harvesting is it actually puts a defect in your food. You're going to remove that with mantra, right? That's why you use mantra. It's a subtle defect, has to be removed by a subtle act on your part. Lack of awareness when processing the food. Impure mood while preparing the food, and failure to bless or consecrate the food. I give this teaching to some of the men and women in prison where I teach Vedanta sometimes, and they have very bad food there, very tamasic, rajasic food, and so I said, that's okay. You need to say a blessing or a mantra over this food and purify it and take it with a pure mind. You know, how you take the food is as important as the food you're taking, if not more so. So you can, like they say, man can live on pork all his life and become illumined. Another man lives on rice and vegetables and stays unillumined. See? So it's the food itself isn't really the thing, it's how you're taking it and trying to take it in higher consciousness, and how you're going to use the energy in it is more important than these others. Nevertheless, at the beginning stages they say, be very careful of taking certain kinds of food that are contributing to your problem. And even in later stages, as we were just saying, if you've fallen into a habit of depending on a certain kind of food or a certain kind of taste you've developed, then be willing to do an austerity, right? Be willing to do some tapas, to do without that thing. And if you can do without it, then prove to yourself that you can do without it, then that's a kind of renunciation muscle that you're developing inside of you, and you can use it any time. It's basic teaching of attachment and non-attachment. That's a big teaching in in Vedic studies. Now that second kind of clarity, as we move toward the end of this second class, is Chitta Prasada. So we are defining the word prasada here as clarity, not just blessed food, but it's clarity on 4 different levels. So you want clarity of mind. That's how you would get these pure thoughts, for instance, that she's saying. Pure food, pure blood, pure energy, pure thoughts. So you see there the teachings. There are 5 aids to help mind become steady. The first is called enthusiasm. The Sanskrit word for that given underneath here in the parens, utsaha. Beautiful word for enthusiasm for spiritual practice, for instance, for purifying your senses, for purifying your prana, for balancing your breath, for taking up a good food regimen. You have to have enthusiasm for those things. For studying the scriptures, if you had enthusiasm for that, you'd make headway very quickly. But if you're just doing it, taking it up because you have to or because you were told to, or any other number of other reasons that people do things, then it's not going to be as effective. So they say if they see a person with enthusiasm, they really like that. You can turn this energy towards something higher. Would you like to play this musical instrument? Yes, I really want to. Okay, here, I'll get it for you. Start playing. See, a person has enthusiasm, they'll make great strides quickly. Otherwise, not. They're not into it. Then sahasa, courage, boldness, fearlessness, if you want to put it that way, one of Swami Vivekananda's favorite teachings. Steadfastness, that's what we were talking about in the first half, about perseverance. You want to keep your meditation going 365 times a year. Not 364. 365 will do it. Until a time when all is meditation for you. Like I saw my guru. All was meditation. And Holy Mother once told him, does God exist only when eyes are closed and cease to exist when eyes are open? Right? So if you close your eyes in meditation, then God exists, you see. Then I come out of my meditation and go about my daily life, and God doesn't exist anymore. No, God exists at all times, with eyes shut or open. So that's a very high state that we were talking about here on this level of our chart under study. And in the meantime, until that high level can be attained, then you're going to have to do that practice with perseverance, steadfastness. That's called dharya. Then, pursuit of wisdom, adhyatma vidya. Very important, as I was just saying. If you have that prana under control, you'll be able to take up a scripture and extract the essence out of it. It's very difficult otherwise to keep yourself at it. And finally, mahatseva, serving the great ones. You know that, in fact, if you read a scripture, you should acknowledge right away the author of that scripture. If you're studying the 8-limbed yoga, there are slokas you can say to Patanjali, thanking him for putting together that system of yoga. There are slokas you can memorize that are just gratitude. We salute Patanjali for doing this, so that we here can. And so you should probably sit with that scripture that you're about to read and just think for a little bit about the author or the main character. And that's called mahatseva, or great service of the great ones. And it's Jnana Yoga, keeping the Jnana Yoga in the world. Otherwise, we wouldn't be sitting here with these charts talking about this right now. In that quest for Chitta Prasada, clarity of mind, there are 4 distractions: sorrow, despair, unsteadiness, and uneven breathing. Dukkha, dharmanasya, angame jayatva, and shasha prashvasa. Some nice long Sanskrit words for you, but nonetheless, you see their English equivalents there. Several of these are 3 of the, called the 4 great traps to grief, sorrow, remorse. There are others that could be added in there, but in this particular system, which is yoga, father of yoga, he's saying that these are the ones that you need to be careful of Unsteadiness here is actually not just your mind, but it's your limbs. You don't know where to put them. That's why it's called Anga Me Jayatva. Anga means limbs, right? So you haven't conquered, you haven't gotten Jaya, victory, over your limbs yet. You see? So you're shifting about all the time, your legs, your back, your arms, your neck, and you haven't fixed your posture yet. So that's a cause of distraction. And so it goes back to the import of this early series. See, somebody might sit for a while without any training. I can meditate for half hour, then all of a sudden, maybe they do. But then a month later, the guna of their mind has changed. And all of a sudden they can't sit again. Mm-hmm. They have chanchala vritti. It means every time they sit, the mind says, you don't want to do this, stand up. And they move away. It's called erratic vibration of the mind. It's against sitting. So one time they thought they could do it, but they didn't have any training to do away with erratic vibration in their mind when it came upon them. So then a month later or a couple weeks later, they can't sit anymore. See? So importance of having mastery over posture and breathing before you even begin to consider divine reality in meditation. And prior to that, master the yamas and niyamas. So it's all a very well set out system for us. Let's look at, in the remaining few minutes, samprasada, clarity of mood. Mind and mood. There is the mind, and then there's its moods it gets into, right? And some of those have to do with the gunas, rajas, tamas, and sattva. That's a basic triple designation. Pretty much you have slothfulness, you have restlessness, and you have balance. And those three are always flip-flopping. But they also mix with each other. So sometimes you feel restless but tired at the same time. Or sometimes you might feel restless but also, your mind is okay, a little bit balanced. So you have these juxtapositions and these admixtures going on all the time. So these moods here, they say, you want the samprasada, you want your mind to be in pretty much one even mood all the time. So try friendship to all beings, maitri. Try mercy for all beings, karuna. Try positivity, or mudita, which also means joy. And try indifference, upekshanam. Indifference to all the problems and sufferings and so forth. It's not callousness we're talking about here. We're talking about being impervious to their insinuation on your mind. Like if you could look at all the sufferings of people but not get put off at all. That would be a very high state according to Vedantists and Buddhists. Is if you got all emotional and out of shape, then what good are you to help them, you see? So you want to keep this detachment, you want to keep this indifference. And when it comes to evil people, the practice of indifference is going to be very good for you. It's about the only way to deal with them. Yes, there are evil beings. Amongst humans too. They're called demoniacal by Krishna. They don't know what to do and what not to do. Sometimes they do evil just for spite. So he says, don't worry, Arjuna, you're not one of them. You're of the divine caste. But there is a basic subdivision between the divine and demoniacal. And of course, this is why things like surrendering the self and other practices later are going to take you out of the realm of the demonic ego. They say, if you haven't surrendered yourself to God yet, then you're a danger to all beings. You're a danger. You don't know what that person's going to do next. They could be very fine for years, all of a sudden go off. See? Ego just goes off. So this is why that clay, your consciousness, pick every little bit of those imperfections out of it before you cast your pot in the kiln. You see, then you'll be absolutely assured of balance, samprasad, see, quality of and equality of mind. The four deadly traps there, I mentioned them: grief, guilt, depression, the lack of self-worth. If you think about them, I don't even need to say anything more about them. There are people whose grief has never been gotten over. They're holding grief their whole life. Shoka. There's also a Swami we know of called Ashokananda, who was in San Francisco not too long ago. He was a very good Swami, very wise man, very enlightened soul. And so he's the bliss of having no grief at all. Ashoka was a nice name he chose. So you can see in those 4 deadly traps a lot of the behavior patterns of people who are having illnesses, mental illnesses and diseases in this day and time. Finally, to finish it off, just as we arrive at our end of time, is the clarity of spirit, Adhyatma Prasada. Adhyatma means that original soul, the Atman. Now, they say in accordance with that, there are 3 conditions of true detachment. Spiritual attainment, freedom from afflictions, and an end to the transmigration process. That is, you know you're not going to be born again in a body, ever, at least not in ignorance. If you want to take on a conscious birth, then that's not really being in a body. These souls that we worship, they were never really in the body. It was like an arm of an octopus to them. The octopus's head was its main consciousness, and its arms went out. Just like that, their bodies are like those arms, you see, doing things in different worlds. Mm-hmm. But their consciousness is always centered in themselves, so they're not really being born, and they're not really dying. They're just projecting bodies and drawing them back at the time, you see. That's all non-duality. You know, that takes on ramifications for us too when we start to consider non-duality ajativada, the path of the birthless, deathless soul. We want to understand that first and foremost. In the meantime, this transmigration process, according to souls like Buddha, must be snapped. We must snap the chain of birth and death. That's like a penultimate goal to reach before enlightenment, is to get off the chain of birth and death with your ancestors. It's very powerful and popular teaching in India for time out of mind. I had somebody write to me an email about it just yesterday. I was having a problem with my ancestors. So we went through a long email exchange, several of them, showing how, where she felt guilt about that, see where she felt grief, how her ancestors were weighing on her, not only ones from the past, but ones that are living today in her family, how they want to keep her from doing what she needs to do spiritually. A whole series of things like that. Ancestors really means relatives, living and past. But the ones that are past are providing those more subtle barriers, which is, again, why you want to course in with the prana, because this is the level of your ancestors right here, prana. They have gone to a realm of energy, subtle form, and they haven't been able to penetrate psychic prana and move on towards sadhana. If they had been doing sadhana, they wouldn't have been caught in the realm of the ancestors in the first place. They'd be helping free people, not being a part of the problem. They'd be a part of the solution. So there's a lot to be said about these 3, as you could say, all right away, but you could see that if you want to measure your true detachment, do you have these 3 conditions? Do you have spiritual attainment under your belt? Are you free from afflictions? That is, has yoga destroyed pain for you? Because that's how Krishna describes it to Arjuna in the Gita. Yoga will become the destroyer of pain for you if you practice it. It's beautiful sloka. And you see people walking around like Ramakrishna knows, no pain, no suffering. Even with cancer of the throat, no suffering. Doesn't that hurt, Master? Only when I come down and talk to you. But if you go, my mind will go back to the feet of Mother Kali and I won't feel this anymore. So they're just not in the body to suffer, you see. Their mind is elsewhere. They've built up that ability to be transcendent, to be detached. All right, so obstacles to those, and we'll end here. The 8 occult powers, we've already mentioned them once. I could bring a chart on that if you want to see them in the next class. Heavenly existence is a great obstacle to the Vedantists. They don't want to go to heaven, they want liberation. They want freedom. Heaven is a place of forms and bodies and Savior and so forth, not where they're headed. They want beyond form, as you get to the Father through the Son, that kind of freedom. And personal lordship. That's the problem with the gods. Now, we talked about the ancestors. They have a certain level they can't penetrate through. With the gods and goddesses, they have lordship. And quite often it's benign, although there are wrathful gods, wrathful goddesses. Quite often it's benign, but nevertheless they cannot transcend the realm of being a god and a goddess because of their desire for personal lordship. And you'll see that in individuals coming to earth. They'll come maybe right out of the realm of the ancestors, the gods, very powerful personages, and they have a very strong attachment to leadership, to domination, to controlling the whole world and so forth, things like that. So a lot more can be said about that. They're called Prakriti Layas, but they manipulate the subtle Prakriti for their own benefit. So there's a whole host of teachings around these. We won't have time for them today. We might be able to pick up where we left off next Sunday at the same time. And I have one other chart about food and disease to show you before we leave this realm. It's called the Origin and Perpetuation of Disease. I'll show that next week. It's one of Lord Vashishta's teachings. So please be on hand for that if you possibly can, and continue on in this 5-class series called Food, Prana, and Sadhana, or connecting the living prana to the illumined mind. Here we'll end with a chant. Om Tat Nayo, Om Tat Nayo Ravrini Mahe, Gatong Yagyaya, Gatong Ye Nupataye, Daivi Svastarastu Naha, Svastir Manusebhyaha, Urdvam Chigatu Besajam, Sangnoastu Dvipade Sangchatushpate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May we make a complete offering into the Great Self. May we always delight in this offering. May we always revere the Lord and Mother of all sacrifices. May divine blessings be upon us. May peace be unto the entire human race. May healing, well-being, and prosperity then also abide among us. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us. May peace be unto all. Om Hari Om. Shri Radha, Shri Radha, Krishna Pada, Sahagana Lalita, Shri Vishakam Vitam Scha, Shri Mata, Shri Gadada, Ramakrishna Sharada, Sita, Shri Ramachandra, Vandeham, Shri Guru, Shri Guru, Shri Uttapada Kamala, Shri Guru, Shri Guru, Shri Guru, Vaishnavamscha.